Good morning. Glad to see you all here this morning. On my way in, I stopped and I picked this up at Speedway. Now, I know maybe not all of you know what this is. If you're younger than 20, maybe you've not seen one of these before. This is a newspaper. It's where we used to get our news before the internet. And when I picked this up, I knew I was going to do it, and when I got it up in my hands, immediately I was filled with anxiety. Not because of what it says, we'll get to that in a minute, but I used to be a paper boy. Now, anybody here ever had a paper route? Or we had a lot of people in first service. Sundays were the absolute worst if you had a paper route. Most days of the week, you could fold the newspaper into thirds. It was very easy to handle. You could get it where you needed to go. But on Sundays, there's so much in here. All these ads and the comics are extra. You can barely fold it in half. And so if you had a paper route where you had 100 papers, maybe you could fit 100 papers in your bag, but on Sundays you could only fit about 30. So you have to keep going back. And to make it worse, I was in Michigan. And so that means in the winter, on Sunday mornings, I was walking through 8 or 9 feet of snow just to... You're laughing, but it was like that back then. Just to get from house to house. And then to compound that, my dad was a pastor. And our church had its first service at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, how spiritual are those people to get up and be at church at 8 o'clock in the morning? But that meant, because we were the pastor's kids, and we had to be at church at 8 o'clock, that the paper route had to be done. You had to be showered. I had to get up at like 5:30 in the morning. Can you imagine such a horrible thing? I know some of you are like, yeah, I do that every day. And I appreciate that you do. So I went to Speedway to get this paper, and I'm buying the paper, and the lady who's cashing me out says, "Are you going to really read that?" And I said, "Actually, no, I'm not." I said, "I don't ever buy the paper. This is just a one-time thing." She said, "Sure, that's what they all say." And then she said, "There's nothing good in there to read." I said, "Well, it's funny that you say that." I said, "Because I'm actually buying this as a sermon illustration to illustrate that there's nothing good in here to read." So let me show you that there's nothing good in here to read. So this is this morning's Dayton Daily News. So this is our paper and talks about what's going on in our community. And I'm not going to surprise you with this, but it's full of bad news. It's full of trouble and problems and stress and anxiety. In fact, if you look at the front page, there's some stories here. One of them is that the Air Force Museum closes and base workers face uncertainty. Now, we all know this is happening, right? The government shuts down. And when that happens, it affects our community more than it does most. And so for some of you, I know this morning, you're kind of dealing with some uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what the trickle-down effect is. And all around in our community, that's what people are facing. There's another one here that's local to us, high costs and empty beds. It's all about the story of Good Samaritan Hospital. One of the biggest health providers in our area is shutting down. And again, who knows what this is going to mean? Is it going to impact healthcare? Is it going to impact jobs? There's all kinds of questions, and we don't know what's happening. There's another story here. This is all just the first page. Aggressive tactics raise concerns. And this is about how our police are fighting against the opioid. I couldn't say this last week either. I say it fine in the first hour. The drug epidemic. Another story. New look at Dayton murders angers mom. I mean, we're just going on and on. You can see story after story after story showing us something's wrong here. Another story. Shutdown's first day brings no sign of deal. We think about this government shutdown, and really this is about what? People can't get along, right? And here we sit all across our country looking at Washington saying, can't you guys just get along? But we live in a world that is marked and characterized by the idea that people can't get along. And really, it's this truth that people can't get along that drives so many of these stories. Turkish warplanes hit Kurdish fighters. People can't get along. This one's kind of shocking. Cardinal rebukes Pope over slander comments. And I read that one. I thought, how far has our world slipped? I mean, the Pope is getting rebuked? Who does that? But even someone can't even get along with the Pope. We could go on and on through the newspaper, and you know the result. We're going to find story after story after story that tells us that something is wrong here. That something is wrong. And we look at this and we say, this can't be how the world was supposed to be. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And probably if you talk to anybody on the street, they would say the same thing. Yeah, it feels like this isn't what it's supposed to be. It feels like our world is broken. And it is. Our world is broken. And it's broken because people can't get along. It's broken because we have a lack of love. People can't love each other. People don't feel loved by others. And because our world has a lack of love, our world is broken. But that's not how our world was meant to be. You see, God created our world to be a place where all of us were loved and loved without limits. And in that original creation, there weren't all of these problems. There wasn't the pain that was caused when people can't get along. Because in that original creation, people loved each other, and God loved people, and people loved God. We've gotten so far from that ideal because we don't love each other. And when we act unlovingly towards others, it breaks the world. And we've broken creation far beyond what God originally intended. And think about what that means for our relationship with Him. Because we, in our loving acts, have broken His world. It is just and righteous and fair for Him to say, you want a broken world? You can have it. And you can have it for eternity. And it would be perfectly right for Him to say, I'll let all of you live in brokenness for all of eternity. But that's not who God is. Because even though we act unlovingly, God acts lovingly. And because God loved us, He sent Jesus. He sent Jesus in the ultimate act of love. Because Jesus came, and for 33 years He lived among us, and He healed some of the brokenness. Remember, He healed the blind. He helped the lame to walk. He healed the deaf. He raised the dead. He went to the poor. He went to those who were being abused, and He lifted them up. Jesus went about healing some of the brokenness in our world, and then He went to the cross, and He allowed Himself to be broken. And in that moment when Jesus allowed Himself to be broken, He took upon Himself all of the brokenness of our world so that we no longer have to be responsible for it. And that means that if we give our lives to Him, in return, He gives us something new. He gives us a new life. He gives us a new creation. He makes us new. He forgives us. This is what Jesus' forgiveness means. This is great. Because Jesus forgives us, even though we still contribute to the brokenness of the world, we still act unlovingly from time to time, because He's forgiven us, every time we do that, He gives us a fresh start. Every time we do that, He allows us to start over. And the reason is He's giving us just a small taste of what the future will be, because that's really what this is all about. Our hope, our joy is rooted in our future, because Jesus has promised us that one day He'll recreate everything. He will make all things new. There will be no more death, no more sadness, no more suffering, no more destruction. All things will be made new. We will all love and be loved fully without limit to each other and to God. That is our hope, and that is our joy. And that is the Christian message. That is what Christians believe. Since the time of Jesus until now, this is what Christians believe, that we have a broken world, that Jesus came to save us, and that He offers us new hope if we will trust in Him. Now, I've just shown you how you can explain the very foundational message of Christianity in just a couple minutes using just circles and lines. Right? If you've been watching behind me, circles and lines on you. So you can sit down with someone, and on a napkin, if someone walks up to you and says, hey, will you please explain to me what Christianity is all about? You can say, yes, do you have a Sharpie and a napkin? And with a Sharpie and a napkin, you can draw circles and lines and say, this is what Christianity is all about. But you know what? Most of the time, people don't walk up to us and say, hey, can you tell me what Christianity is all about? In fact, that probably hasn't happened to most of us. And it probably never will happen to most of us. Because we live in a world that is perhaps a little hostile towards religion and towards Christianity and towards God and towards Jesus. And yet Jesus said to His followers, if you believe in me, if you follow me, then you will acknowledge me before men. He said this in Luke chapter 12. Listen to what Jesus said. He said, "Fear not, you are more valuable than any sparrows. And I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God." Now I hear this, and I think, well, of course I would acknowledge Jesus before men. If someone came up to me and said, "Tell me about Jesus, tell me about Christianity," of course I would be happy to do that. But then I think back in history to maybe one of Jesus' best friends, one of his closest followers, a man that we all know as one of the leaders of the church, Peter. And when given that opportunity, Peter said, "I don't know him. I don't know who you're talking about." Because Peter realized he was in a hostile place. He was in a place where people didn't want to hear about Jesus. And so he denied Jesus. Now Jesus offered him forgiveness. Sometimes we experience fear when we think about talking about Jesus. And sometimes we experience hesitance because we don't really want to have those spiritual conversations. And it's because we realize that people don't really want to hear it. In fact, a lot of times, when you start to talk about Jesus, or you start to talk about God or religion or Christianity, people turn and run the other way. And the reason they do that is because they have been traumatized by a false view of Christianity. You see, when we're traumatized by an experience, we run quickly anytime we see anything that reminds us of that experience. You've heard me talk about my dogs before. I have two dogs. They're both small, Miley and Roscoe. We didn't name Miley. If you're thinking, "Oh man, they're Miley Cyrus fans," we're not. We didn't name her. She's a rescue. But Miley and Roscoe are our dogs. Miley is the smart one. Roscoe is the happy one. Roscoe is also very small. He's a mix of a Chihuahua and a Corgi. And so what that means is he's very small and close to the ground. So usually that's kind of cute. He has a cute little run, he does. But in wintertime, he starts to have some trouble. Because as soon as there's snow on the ground, if you just get a couple of inches of snow, all of a sudden he's up to his belly in snow. And he's just a little guy, so he gets cold really fast. This winter, he started doing something we hadn't seen him do before. This is going to be a long morning, isn't it? This winter, he started doing something we hadn't seen him do before. He would go out into the yard to do his business, and he'd be running around out there. And then after a little while, he would kind of just stop. And he'd maybe lift a leg up, and then lift the other leg up, and then he'd look at me with this really odd expression. And then he'd rear up on his hind legs, and he'd tuck his front legs really close to him, and he'd kind of look at me with this horrified expression, and then just fall over. And then he'd be just laying on his side in the snow, kind of doing this. And the first time I saw him do it, I said, "Roscoe, what's going on?" I said, "Roscoe, come here, buddy." And he tried to come, but he couldn't get up, and he was just kind of shaking in the snow like this. Now, I thought, oh, he's just playing. He's just having some fun. And I don't want to enable this. So I said, "Roscoe, come here, buddy. You can make it." And he kind of just did this, and he started to cry. And so I said, "Something's wrong with him." So I ran out, and I picked him up, and I bundled him in close and brought him inside, and we wrapped him up in blankets and warmed him up, and he was fine. But we're like, what happened to Roscoe? He actually froze. It was like he froze outside because of the snow and the cold. Now this happened a couple more times. Like I said, Roscoe's not the smart one. He's happy but dumb. Eventually he caught on, though, and he had these traumatizing events. And so now when it's really cold out and there's snow on the ground and he has to go out to do his business, he goes outside, he gets it done, and he turns and he runs as fast as he can to get back inside because he doesn't want to experience that traumatic event again. And we are all the same, aren't we? When we experience something traumatic, we run as fast as we can if we see something that reminds us of it. And I want you to understand this morning. There are a lot of people in our world who have been traumatized by a false idea of Christianity. And so when they see anything that looks like that, they run the other way. And so while you may have the best of intentions, and your heart may be full of love towards someone, if they've experienced that trauma and you come up to them and say, "Hey, I'd like to tell you about Jesus, my Lord and Savior," they turn and they run. Not because of you, but because they've had this traumatic experience in their past where they've been judged, or they've felt condemned, or they've experienced hate, or they've been pushed aside because they didn't check off all the right boxes. And so this morning, I want us, as we walk through this topic of talking about our faith and having spiritual conversations, I want us to keep in mind that this is not a sales pitch, all right? We're not trying to trick people into the kingdom. There's not this procedure that we go through to make sure we get all the boxes checked and get the people in, but this is about relationships. It's about what we do to enter people's world so that when the time is right, they may be willing to open themselves to hear the good news of Jesus. I told you a few weeks ago that I was a lifeguard when I was in college. I'm not a lifeguard anymore. I don't swim so well. I sink right to the bottom. But I used to be a lifeguard, and lifeguards actually have a really rigid group of steps that they go through when they need to rescue someone. And I want to start by sharing those with you this morning. If I'm sitting up in my lifeguard chair, there are some steps that I take if I see someone in trouble. The first step is I assess. I look at the situation to determine, is that really someone who's drowning, or are they just having fun? Because actually drowning and having fun look a lot alike. I'm not saying it's fun to drown, but when someone's splashing around in the water, they might just be playing. And if someone's just having fun and I jump out of my chair and start doing mouth to mouth, they may not be happy. The other problem is if they're just having fun and I leave my chair, now there's no one in the chair in case someone else is in trouble. And so the first step is to assess the situation and determine, is this really someone who needs to be saved? When I determine that they are, the next step is to enter the water. Now, lifeguards are actually trained on how to enter the water without ever going under the water. Because once I know that someone's in trouble, I don't want my eyes ever to leave that person. If I take my eyes off that person for one moment, they could go under and I wouldn't find them. And so I can jump out of a chair and actually hit the water, and I'll pull my legs like this and my arms like this, and the moment I hit the water, I kick my legs together and I pull my arms forward, and that enables me to keep my head above the water even if I'm jumping out of a chair. I can keep my eyes on the person. Once I've entered the water, I move to rescue. So I'm going to swim to the person, and when I get to the person, I'm going to figure out the best way to rescue this person. Now, if they're already sinking underwater and they're non-responsive, I'm going to grab them and I'm going to pull them in. But sometimes they're still kicking about and thrashing about, and you know what? I'm not going to go in to help them. I'm going to just kind of circle around and swim and try to talk to them and reduce the panic, because if I go in there and they're still swinging and splashing, they might hit me, knock me out, and then we're both in trouble. And the truth is, as long as you're swinging and splashing, you're not drowning. So I'm going to wait until they're ready to be saved, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to rescue them. And once I've rescued them, I'm going to move them to a safe place where we determine the next step. This is how we rescue people. Now, every situation is different. It all plays out differently, and I need to know that I've got to adjust on the fly and see what's going on. But the reality is, if I walk through this process, more often than not, the rescue attempt will be successful. This morning, I want to talk to you about 4 steps in your life. And I don't want you to think of these as chronological steps you work through with people, but I want you to think of as steps to implementing character traits into your life so that you will be the kind of person that people want to talk to. You will be the kind of person that people want to share their life with. You will be the kind of person that finds your way into spiritual conversations so that when the time is right, you can talk about the hope that you have and the joy that you have in Jesus. So let me give you the 4 steps and then we'll walk through them. Here they are. Notice, serve, listen, offer. Notice, serve, listen, offer. We all ought to be people who notice what's going on around us. You know, when we're kids, we do this really well. Little kids see everything. Look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that. And in fact, if you have a little child, sometimes you probably get tired of look at that. You're like, I see it, that's enough. And as we get older, we seem to not notice things as well. I think part of that is because we are so busy noticing our own busyness, and we're so busy noticing our own problems and our own cares that we stop noticing the lives of others. You know, the truth is that all around you, all the time, there are people who are looking for something. There are people who are hurting. There are people who are going through things in life. And if you just open your eyes and look beyond yourself, you would see these people. and it would give you the opportunity to enter into their lives and show them the love of Jesus. If you want to be a person that finds your way into spiritual conversations, you need to begin by noticing what's going on around you. You need to be a person who serves, because actions speak louder than words. I can tell someone over and over how much I think of them. I can tell them how great they are. I say, hey, you're a wonderful person. I'm so glad you're my friend. It's so good to see you. And if I never have actions that back those words, eventually those words become empty. Nobody did this better than Jesus. Jesus served and served and served. And he didn't have to. Jesus was God. He was the creator. He was going around meeting people that he had created and then serving them. At any time, Jesus could have set up his throne and said, you know what? Y'all can serve me. But that's not what he did. That's not the model he gave us. That's not the example he set. He served everyone he encountered. He put away his own agenda. He put away his own desires. And he used what he had to meet the needs of others. And because Jesus served, people wanted to hear what Jesus had to say. You see, people will open their ears and their hearts to you when you've opened your hands and your feet to them. We need to be people who serve. We need to be people who listen. The Bible is full of verses and passages that tell us the value of listening. Proverbs over and over says, the person who listens is wise. Only the fool doesn't listen. My favorite listening passage is in James. Every one of us should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Someone said that we all have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we should listen twice as much as we talk. But the truth is that we have to be willing to listen to people if we want them to listen to us. Questions are a fantastic way to listen. In fact, I would suggest to you that the questions you ask are as important as the answers you give. You know, sometimes we think that we've got to give everybody the answers because, hey, we're God's people. We're the church. We're Christians. We're Jesus followers. We have the answers for life, and we need to give people the answers. But the truth is, the questions we ask are as important as the answers we give, because we don't know where those people have been. We don't know what they've experienced, what they've seen, what they've heard. We don't know if there's some traumatic event in their past that causes them to want nothing to do with Jesus or his people. And how can you know that if you don't listen, if you don't ask questions? You know, in your program this morning, there is a half-sheet handout that's full of questions. And these are questions that you can ask people just to kind of feel where they've been, to understand what their thoughts are. And you can look at them and see how these questions can lead you into conversations where you can talk about spiritual matters. But here's the thing. You can't listen just to respond. Have you ever had a conversation with someone that does that? You're talking and you're saying something, and you can see it in their eyes that they've already got their answer, and they're just waiting for you to take a breath, and they're going to jump in. That's not how we listen. That's not how Jesus listens. We listen to learn. We listen to love. And as we listen, we can know how best to reach these people. Here's the thing. If we notice and we serve and we listen, the opportunity will come for us to offer. When someone is ready and their heart is open and their ears are open, you can offer something to them. You can offer them your belief, which you think is true about Jesus, about God. You can tell them, hey, this is where I've been, and this is where I am, and this is what Jesus has done for me. You can then offer to walk through it with them. But I know that many of us fear this moment, right? When you have a time and somebody says, what do you think about God? What do you think about eternity? What do you think about Jesus? Why do you go to church? They're like, I don't have the answers. So let me show you a couple verses in Ephesians that really sums up what the answer is. All right, this is Ephesians chapter 2. This is Paul writing, and this is what he says. You were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. What Paul is saying is the problem is us. All of us are the problem. We were dead in trespasses. He's talking about what we started with, our lack of love. We're the problem. Our unloving actions, our unloving behavior has wrecked the world. And so we are under the wrath of God, deservedly so. We've destroyed His creation. We are the problem. Now, listen, nobody's going to disagree with you on this. If you say the problem in our world is people, everybody's going to agree with you on that because people are the problem. It doesn't matter what religion they are. It doesn't matter if they're an atheist. Everybody knows that people are the problem. But here's what makes Christianity different than every other religion. See, every other religion will tell you, yes, people are the problem, but people are also the answer. See, if you follow this set of rules, then you'll be okay. If you follow this path, then you'll be okay. If you obey these regulations, then you'll be okay. If you'll follow this set of behaviors, then you'll be... People are the problem, but people are also the answer. Christianity says, no, people are not the answer. People have been trying to be the answer for a long time, and it hasn't worked. There's a better answer than that, and here's what it is. Paul goes on to write this, verse 4, but God, I love that part, right? Remember Paul just said, hey, we're the problem, we're dead in our trespasses, we're under the wrath of God, and then he says, wait, that's not the end of the story. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which He loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, God loved us when we didn't love Him, made us alive together with Christ. By grace, you have been saved. You see, people are the problem, but Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the solution. God's love, shown to us through Jesus, given to us because of His grace, is the answer to our world's problems. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can talk about this. And we're all different people, and so how we communicate is different. You know, I showed you at the beginning of our time this morning one of the ways I like to talk about it with my circles and my lines on a napkin with a Sharpie. Let me show you really quick another way to do it. You're going to think it's a little bit similar, but it just demonstrates that there's lots of ways to do this. By the way, before I show you the video, YouTube can be a good thing, right? You have to be careful you don't fall down the rabbit hole and spend all night watching blooper videos. I got to see one more guy get hit in the face, right? I want to see one more rope swing break or whatever it is that you watch on YouTube. But there are some good things there. And this is one video that I found on YouTube this week that kind of just is one guy saying, hey, when I talk about Jesus, here's how I do it. So I want to show it to you right now.
So we live in this world, and it's characterized by brokenness. We don't have to look very hard to see there are things like disease, disasters, wars. There's a lot of pain in this world, but this is not God's original design. God has a perfect design. And the way that we have gotten ourselves into brokenness is through something that the Bible calls sin. Sin is turning away from God's design and pursuing our own way, and that leads us to brokenness. Brokenness eventually leads us to death, and this death will separate us from God forever. But God doesn't want us to stay in brokenness, so He's made a way out, and that way is Jesus. Jesus comes and He enters into our brokenness, and the death that we deserve for pursuing brokenness, Jesus takes our place and dies on a cross, and His body is broken for us. And 3 days after He dies, He rose from the dead, and He made a way out of brokenness. And people try many things to get out of brokenness, things like religion, things like success or relationships, education or drugs and alcohol, but none of these things can get us out of brokenness. The only way out is Jesus. And if we turn from our sin and believe that Jesus died for us and rose from the dead, we can leave brokenness and grow in a relationship with God and pursue His design. And more than that, we can go. We can be sent just like Jesus back into brokenness to help others come through Him to pursue God's design. Now, there's two types of people in the world. There are people that are pursuing God's design, and there's people that are still in brokenness. We have to ask ourselves, where are we? So, where do you think you are?
I'm going to be honest with you all for a minute here. I have a little bit been dreading this week. This is not a sermon that I'm really good at preaching. And part of that is because I know how this can be misused. And I know that there are people out there who who are deathly afraid of someone coming and preaching at them. And the last thing I want is for us to be a church where people go out and preach at people, because that's not what Jesus called us to do. And I also know that when I talk about something like this, it is fear-inducing, because all of us say, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can talk to people about Jesus because I'm so afraid. And so I want us to wrap up our time today. I want us to look at one more verse, and this is written by Peter. And remember, at the beginning, Peter's the guy that denied Jesus, right? But now much later in his life, Jesus has forgiven him. He's experienced Jesus' grace. Now he's one of the leaders of the church, and he's writing this letter from the city of Rome. And while he's writing it, Nero is the emperor. Remember, Nero was a bad guy. He hated the Christians. And under Nero's reign, if you were a Christian, you were likely to die. If he knew you were a Christian, if his people knew you were a Christian, you would be imprisoned, and then eventually you would be killed. Either you'd be set on fire, or you'd be thrown to the lions, or have some other kind of horrific death. And so in that context, listen to what Peter writes. He says, "But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed." Even if you should suffer. Even if you talk about Jesus and get burned at the stake, you will still be blessed. Even if people know you're a Christian and persecute you because of it, even if people laugh at you, even if they mock you, you will still be blessed. So have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy. Now hear this. I think most of us here this morning would say, yeah, Christ is Lord of my life. I've given my life to Jesus. He's my Lord. If I am going to honor Christ as Lord in my life, here's what Peter says I have to do. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Now notice the arrangement of events. Peter says you should be living in such a way that people look at you, say, that guy's got a lot of hope. That girl is full of joy. And when people look at you and see that you're full of hope and you're full of joy and you don't get down in circumstances, they're going to say to you, what is the reason for your hope? You see, this is what happens when we are people who notice, people who serve, people who listen, is people see that and they come to us and say, what is the reason for your hope? And Peter says, when they come to you and say, what is the reason for your hope? Be prepared to give an answer. That's what I want to do this morning, is I want to prepare you to give an answer. And listen to how he finishes. He says, yet do it with gentleness and respect. We have a great message. We do. Jesus loved us so much that he gave himself for us. He experienced brokenness so we don't have to. He gives us a new start, a fresh day, a bright future. That's our message. And Peter says, when people ask you, be prepared to give an answer. I know many of you are on LinkedIn. It's just another social media network. I kind of think of it as Facebook for business people. But LinkedIn is this place where people can do this cool thing of introducing friends to other friends. And so if I have this friend over here and this friend over here, and I think, hey, they do good to meet each other, I can actually introduce them. So if you come to me sometime and say, hey, Pastor David, things have been going bad here. I've lost my job. Here's my skills. Do you have any ideas for me? I might say, you know what? Actually, I know someone who maybe could hire you. Let me introduce you. And my guess is that most of you would do that for a friend. If a friend came to you and said, hey, I'm having a hard time here. Do you know anybody that can help me? If you knew someone that could help them, you'd make that introduction. You wouldn't hesitate. And I'm asking you this morning to think about this. There is a person that has changed your life. Jesus has done an amazing thing for you. Now, are you willing to make an introduction? Are you willing to introduce him to the people who most need to know him? It may not happen today or tomorrow, but as you begin to invest yourselves in their lives, that time will come when they say, what is the reason for your hope? Are you prepared to give them an answer? Let's pray. Father, thank you for the hope that you've given us. Thank you that we have a bright future. Thank you for Jesus' work on our behalf. Help us to be people who are loving the world, who are loving those around us, and yet who are prepared to give an answer when the time arrives. Help us to not be afraid, but to love those around us enough to invite them to meet you. In your name, amen. Remember how much God loves you. He loves you so much that he sent his Son so that we could be with him for eternity. So this week, find places where you can take the love that God has poured into you and pour it into the lives of others. Have a fantastic week. Have a wonderful day today. We'll see you next Sunday. God bless you.